perspective.
Yeah, but there's no excuse for what happened to this
Michael
lady.
Camoran said it right there.
Almost
He
like
says,
it.
there's discretion involved.
I was more just
nobody gets to be okay and do that.
I was just more
It's a bad
getting
human.
into the mindset and how they approach things. It's not necessarily. I mean, it is for sure for some of them. It is I am opposed to this marijuana thing and I will go after it. But for a lot of them, it's following orders to the nth degree.
They're not using their discretion. They don't believe they have as much room, maybe because they're new and are just.
Oh yeah, and that certainly is a factor.
Because
Absolutely.
obviously they think their bosses want them to lock up
I have a
80-year-old
close
women
family
that are
friend
smoking
who's-
marijuana at home.
I remember a couple years ago, he was a first-year police officer,
Yeah.
and he was terrified that he was going to get in trouble.
Steve Miller used to say the same thing too. Some watch commanders would do this, and some watch commanders would do that. So if you happen to be working on the shift where there's sort of a hard ass that's running the shift, you better run every single thing by him instead of using that discretion.
And a lot of these rookies are hot dogs anyway. It's just part of their nature.
How many charges come through where there's not at least the call to the superior to say, hey, I've got this 80-year-old woman
Yeah,
I
you would
just
think.
arrested for her card being expired and she has an eighth of marijuana. What do I do?
Yeah,
Well,
it's
listen, one of the things I think needs to be discussed is it's very little discretion for police officers to act upon. They are, they come upon something, they can't make, they're supposed to err on the side of finding, so here comes the police
Well,
officer.
here's our authority on
Right.
this.
They have
I think
discretion.
There's very little discretion.
But I don't think
But hold on, let me finish my point, and Steve can take over after this. I like the fact that the Sun was trying to find the silver lining. She seems like the type of person that's lived her life with all of her challenges, finding the silver lining. Cannabis may have been one of those things that helped her see more clearly what that silver lining was and whatever drama. That's an important point of this. The other important point was she's on the show because the outrage. We're all outraged, right? So that's what makes this interesting. So we're all allowed to be outraged. But I like the fact that they kind of turned it around because she is like the perfect poster child, right? She's got a tremendous tongue about her. She's very well spoken. She's not afraid to talk about it. And part of her message is she wants to out herself about it. People shouldn't be embarrassed. I agree. And we should have those discussions. And the view of it, so I'm 100%, but, he shouldn't, part of the whole story is that an 82-year-old woman got arrested for smoking some cannabis in her house because her card was expired. And that is outrageous.
Not just arrested, but
Outrageous.
And charged $12
Taken
for
to
staying in
jail.
jail.
and handcuffed.
They made her
the
drag a mattress. An 82-year-old woman, they made her drag a mattress.
In her defense, though, I mean,
Yeah.
she sounded like she was like, I'm going to make the most of it. It's like sleepover camp. But it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean,
Ridiculous.
it's just absolutely ridiculous.
And then charged her. For the
This is the
indignity
latest
of it
chapter
all,
in-
they charged her $12
The
for
latest
it.
chapter in the book of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard regarding marijuana prosecutions. Every single year we have a new worst case scenario. This is the 2018 champion.
No doubt.
I mean, what I kind of missed, like, she only got halfway through the story, but she was going into about how they were asking her, how to handle being raped. Like in
Yeah,
jail.
well, that was she felt it was like a public service announcement that was made to each incoming
And
inmate.
my thought is,
It's part of the
part of the routine.
what would have happened if they put her in a room with some, somebody who was maybe not dangerous per se, but maybe a little mentally imbalanced, maybe on a different type of drug?
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of mentally unbalanced people.
Right.
It happens all the time. What do you mean? What if it
There are
happens?
I'm just
plexiglass
saying
doors
that
and
there was-
windows in there.
I mean,
that the guards
when
can
she said
see
she was
in.
being put in
People
the
died in the Macomb County Jail from
Oh,
withdrawal
the guards
of drugs.
have so much empathy,
And-
Rick. There's so much empathy, so they're going to just please.
But anyway, the reason we were about to ask Steve for his opinion is we were getting to the discussion of, police discretion. This was a potentially rookie officer who, maybe it was just trying to make sure she was following the straight and narrow, didn't want to upset the bosses, had the marijuana smell, found the marijuana, followed the rule book that says when you get the marijuana, you put them in the back of your police car, you put handcuffs on them, you bring them to jail, you charge them. How does that work within, and obviously it's probably
That's the question already.
Yeah.
Oh, look what's coming from this guy.
From over here, I can.
I mean,
No one should
just,
say
at what point in time, at what point is it like a point in your career when you start to feel more comfortable to have discretion, or is it just kind of
a question. Not
or is it more of just, a departmental thing, or is it just a personality? I mean,
The key word in all this is that it probably was a rookie,
Right.
and maybe even on probation, scared to death if you don't. Like, my training officer told me, if you have this, this, and this, you have to do this, otherwise you're going to get in trouble if you don't do it. Whereas your more seasoned officers, I don't think are going to make this arrest.
Let me ask this.
I had one of my good training officers said to me one time when dealing with the elderly people, saying, and he said, when you're dealing with an elderly person, think of that as your grandmother. Are you going to speak to your grandmother? Speak to these people like you would speak to your own grandmother. Treat them like you'd only treat your own grandmother. I mean, if your grandmother was speeding a little bit down the road, would you think that officer should give your grandmother a ticket? Maybe sometimes there's cases where there's a grandmother with a lead foot that deserves it. You use discretion, please,
And
when it
common
makes
sense.
common sense.
What's the priority of a police officer? Is it protect and serve or arrest?
First of all, if you report your grandma that she shouldn't be driving because she's senile, she's going to be calling her grandson to come pick her up. So every police officer has an incentive to let the grandma keep driving. Let me just say that. Just kidding. But we had, and I think everyone who, from some prior episode with Federspiel, we talked about, there was a time when officers had discretion. You'd hear them driving a kid home, so they pull him over, pouring the beer out. And,
Right.
Right?
And,
Yeah.
And that stopped.
Oh, I've definitely
well,
been
it
involved
stopped
in that. Or
with
dumping weed
alcohol
out, too.
and,
I've been
and
involved
drinking,
in that,
especially in matters. There's a few matters where police officers have zero discretion, and one of those is that drunk driving stop.
Yeah.
Because you got a few officers out there don't want to make the drunk driving stop. They want to have their night go as peaceful as possible. They want to take their complaints. They want to make write a couple of tickets and keep the bosses off their back, right? So if they pull over this person, now they're on camera. So you pull over a suspected drunk driver, you're on camera.
Not
So
always.
you can get in trouble if they see you got this person who's obviously drunk, and if their microphone isn't miraculously turned off or not working like it tends to do sometimes, you lack discretion in those situations.
This just happened
it's
in
usually
Ferndale.
drunk driving and domestic violence. Officers have no discretion.
No, our chief of police had to resign over this. They pulled over a Dearborn cop in Ferndale last year, drunk, and let him go. And it was on camera, and they ran it by the chief of police, and he covered the whole thing up. He had to resign. The cop got fired.
Yeah.
They claimed, so.
But when, like this scenario, this woman we just talked to, that's a perfect example of when an officer should
Yeah.
really use discretion.
Use discretion, not with a obvious drunk driver, but with
Right.
an elderly woman with
Smoking
a small-
marijuana in her house.
in her own house.
In her house. And they were there uninvited.
You have no reason to be there, a ridiculous reason to be there.
I could almost, as she's telling this story, I can picture this young girl
coming down,
officer
yeah.
who
Step by step.
doesn't really know what she's so uncomfortable in the job still that she just doesn't know what to do, and I better just
arrest this woman.
I smell marijuana. I better act on my probable cause.
How-
And
but how-
inquire further with this woman as to where she's keeping her marijuana, and I'm going to find the marijuana. And now, I'm going to help her clean her kitchen. And I'm
Can I
gonna
say
be
something?
nice,
Hey,
nice,
so
nice,
can I say a
and then-
lawyerly thing?
Yes.
Do not ever consent to a coming into your house. I
Absolutely.
mean, this whole thing would have been easily avoided.
Right, but
Hey, so wait a second.
But she wasn't going to do that.
People developing from the police in this area is because they think it's okay to talk about it because they think they're legal with their medical marijuana status.
How difficult-
But never talk to the police in any circumstance.
Hey, Steve, how difficult is it to convey a message that when you're in a situation, you can use a little discretion to discern if there's any obvious immediate threat to the public or any real reason to get this person off of the street given the set of circumstances?
That's what they talk about police culture.
And she could apply that
Here you
to,
go.
to
Here you
this
go.
situation.
Let me be the police officer.
Decide to let those
Mrs.,
people go. Decide to be hard ass about them.
Mrs. Dolores, I smell marijuana out here on the outside your door.
Hey,
here.
go
Is that right?
reapply for your card and,
Are
have
you
a-
smoking
have
on the
a fun
porch?
time. See you
No, I'm
later.
smoking in my house. Okay, that's all I want to make sure.
A million different better
Right,
ways
have
to
a
handle
warrant?
it.
No.
I think
All right.
investigation's
That's
over.
good.
Investigation's
You're
over.
If it were me, I wouldn't even inquire about the smell at that point. I'm talking to
The
this
reason- she
nice
was at the-
old lady.
Returning an ID. She found an ID. Wasn't that the premise?
Yeah, she was
Returning
taking
a niece's ID.
The great granddaughter.
So that she, that
Great
led to
race
there.
something, yeah.
Which sounds like the job you do.
Yeah, there you go. See ya.
The worst is that there wasn't a complaint.
No.
The worst
Right.
is that maybe it was oregano. that she smelled. Maybe it was a
Maybe she
Japanese
thought she was
fern.
going to impress.
Maybe it was a little bit of none of their
impress
fucking
the
business.
Senior officers
Exactly.
with her marijuana
Oh, for real.
arrest.
Close the door. You have a warrant? No, close the
they
door.
still
You're done.
like those. It still counts as a drug arrest.
Drug arrest. It's a cartel.
There are
It's a
so many
lady
ways in which we see the system broken. Now, I appreciate that 99% of the times the system works okay, but when we find these egregious examples of broken system, we're supposed to talk about it. We're supposed to debate this about and make sure that people have a dialogue with their local police officers. What happens if my grandma runs afoul? What happens if, something? So this can be instructive.
It also reflects that if this is a new young officer, I think it's fair to say there's been no steps taken in the training of young new officers to look at marijuana any differently.
No, because
therein lies the problem. We're 8 or 9 years into it. I promise you that she had no training on the difference between an expired card and an X card.
I guarantee she hasn't, and it's still about the war on drugs. They're still training these officers today like I was when I came up. It's not about the traffic violation you're stopping them for. It's not about returning the lost items to their rightful owner. It becomes,
Sticking your snot around.
Yeah. They teach you from day one.
I think
It's not about what it's about. You need to find probable cause to get into people's houses and get into people's cars, mainly cars.
Did Dolores
to find drugs,
right?
Because we're fighting the war on drugs out here, people, and that's the priority.
So Dolores at one point described the police officer. She said then she got her nose in the air like a little shooty, and she was running around sniffing the air. I thought, did she say shooty?
She did.
Like a little shooty? That's amazing.
Hilarious.
What a great characterization that was.
Josh reminded us of a case that we had that started out with turned in to the lost and found at the police department an iPad.
It was left outside of Home Depot.
Like X amount of days later, they were executing a search warrant at the guy's house. Okay, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they allegedly say it was open.
You got to talk into the mic.
They claim that it was open even though it was locked, according to our client. And somehow the guy decided that the best way to find
The owner.
was going to be to start looking through all his pictures.
Oh, that makes sense.
So he's streaming through the pictures, finds some pictures of some marijuana plants,
Rubbing it out a couple times along.
goes goes and
There were some girlfriend nudes.
takes a break, drinks some water, rehydrates, then goes and gets a search warrant, and then all of a sudden he's going through his emails, finding the address, and the rest is, as we say, history. And I mean, not to mention that having pictures of marijuana on your phone should not be probable cause to search something.
You need a search warrant for a phone now.
Yeah,
right?
you do.
So be careful with your phones, your computers, your pictures, your social media.
Yeah, lock your phone.
They'll go right to
If you're going to have a
Facebook pages and find out where you're at and what you're doing and what you're selling.
I think they know where all of our Facebook
Be
pages
careful
are already.
with all of it because they can track it all.
Yeah, they can.
And if you're going to have an electronic phone or a smartphone, and you need to be able to disengage it if you lose it. That's you can't have both. You got to have if you're going to be able to function with it. Or find it.
But I mean, I think the
You're going to lose
iPad.
something.
It's the same thing as all the other situations. I mean, in all honesty, there's no way that this officer decided to look for his information in the pictures. He probably found his information.
Was a lady cop.
No, he's talking about
No,
something
I was
else
talking
now.
about the other
story,
case.
yeah.
I mean, he clearly went in there and just decided to keep on snooping because, like Steve is saying, training is to find the other stuff. Returning the property, pulling somebody over for a speeding violation is just a way in.
Let's talk about this. Is a great investigation. Think about the amount of effort and energy he had to do. He's sitting at the desk one day, probably running this lost and found at the police department. Some guy brings an iPad. I gotta check this out. Get a whole criminal
In between
investigation
cups
going.
of coffee.
Didn't have to leave the office. Didn't have to leave the office.
Somehow
Didn't have
got
to
through the lock
checked
on
out one
iPad.
witness. Didn't have to take a statement. You submit anything to the lab. He's just like, la-di-da, iPad day.
Probably went to the evidence room, took a picture of the plants that were in there. No way. Why are these on this phone?
Was there a trash pick involved in this one as well?
I don't even remember. They did some
Usually
they did some
something
they did
in
some
the trash
trespassing.
bowl.
I'll tell you that. They did some
So-
trespassing.
Be
All right.
careful what you put in your trash as well. That's always part of it. Seems like.
All right, Jim. Is it time for a quick break?